going forward. Support increased slightly from 56% in a January 17th poll to 58%, supporting the impeachment after the acquittal. President Joe Biden, though, has a 62% approval rating among all surveyed, a number achieved because he's got near universal support among Democrats and, go figure, a surprisingly strong showing among Republicans. We'll see how that translates to votes as we move forward in this very divided America. And that's just a bit of what's news for now. I'm Nicole Sandler. If you appreciate these reports and the Nicole Sandler Show, I hope you'll consider making a contribution.
The Leslie Marshall Show, the only true democracy in talk radio, of, for, and by you, the people. Live nationwide and streaming live at lesliemarshallshow.com. Call in with your thoughts at 888-6-LESLIE.
Here to set you free. Happy Tuesday. I'm Leslie Marshall. Welcome back. Only true democracy and talk. Welcome to those listening on radio, on stream, on podcast, and watching us on Twitter's Periscope Live, Facebook Live, and YouTube Live. I am not doing product placement for those who happen to see the Starbucks thing. I just really like their Breve Latte. And this is my second coffee of the day because I didn't sleep well last night. Second, yes to the two people at Ralph's Supermarket who were staring at me. Yes, I am me. It's kind of scary when you see TV makeup above the mask and then professional sort of shirt for radio, but on the bottom, sweats and slippers. It's confusing. and a beat up old jean jacket that needs to go into the wash. Anyway, this is Tuesday. I'm Leslie Marshall. And first of all, I hope all of you are safe and I hope you get your electricity back on. I know there are many of you in many states that are freezing. I grew up in Boston. I've lived through blizzards. I live in California right now. It's in the 60s, which is cold for some Californians. But certainly, I know your pain, those of you who've had no power. We've had that here in California with fires and high winds. I've also lived through it in the various cities and states. I've lived in Buffalo, New York, Chicago, Illinois, Houston, Texas, Boston, Massachusetts, Miami, Florida. So I've been through hurricanes. I've been through tornadoes. I've been through earthquakes, and I've been through terrible, I've been through hail, sleet, ice, snow. No, I'm not a postal worker. Guess I should be with that. But quite frankly, I know how bad it can be, especially if you're not expecting these kind of temperature drops in some places. And when it's so cold for so long, it can be very difficult. Pipes can freeze up. I posted on Twitter, there was a guy that took boiling water, and I think he was in Texas, and he threw it in the air and it froze, right there, in the air. It can be very dangerous, especially for pets. Keep your pets indoors. It can be dangerous for children. There are some areas that worry about frostbite, that area where the guy threw the boiling water that would freeze in the air. So stay indoors, stay safe. I hope you get your power. I certainly hope you will stay warm and be smart. I'm not trying to be smart here. When I say I don't mean intelligent smart, I mean snarky. It amazes me how Republican states will just, demonize Democratic presidents. But then when they're in a time like this, they beg them for funding. And unlike our former president, this president doesn't look if you have a blue state, a red state, or a blue governor or a red governor. He looks at the need based on what the weather has done to these areas that have been hit the hardest, and will provide that because he is a human being. And then also just want to also say that it just amazes me that in some of these states, even my own, when you have a storm like this, Texas, for example, right? It's like freezing. Stay off the roads, stay indoors, and people do it, right? They'll do it for the weather. Why can't they wear a mask for the virus? I still can't wrap my head around that. Anyway, I'm Leslie Marshall. Let's kick it off and check what is ripped from the headlines before we get to our first guest joining us later regarding some things, all COVID, with a great member of our medical community from Johns Hopkins. Speaker Pelosi, Democrat of California, in a letter to House Democrats, yesterday, said there will be an independent 9/11 type commission to be set up to investigate the January 6th U.S. Capitol insurrection. I just want to bring up Republicans were trying to blame her. Now, let me explain something, okay? Here's where 2 + 2 is 4. If you're guilty, if you were in charge of what led to January 6th and you're guilty, you're not going to have a commission because that commission is going to find out that you were guilty. Just like Hillary Clinton sat for 11 hours because, and she didn't really have to show up. How many people don't show up, right? When they're called? John Bolton, Ambassador Bolton, we had him here on the program, right? How many people don't show up when they're called, right? We've seen that from plenty of Republicans. Hillary Clinton sat for 11 hours. And what did they decide? After 17 investigations, bipartisan investigations, they found zero evidence that she was responsible from Benghazi. And by the way, that's what this and any commission and investigation into January 6th will find. Speaker Pelosi certainly would not bring harm to her colleagues, her house, herself, her staff. So the Republicans, I think she beat them at their own game because they were like, we should have an investigation. And she's like, I agree. Let's do it. and so that little let's blame it on Pelosi, it percolated and then it just died down. But here's why it matters, because there were calls for a bipartisan commission to investigate the deadly attack growing in recent weeks. It certainly has escalated since the acquittal of former President Trump over the weekend of charges of high crimes and misdemeanors. This could be the last avenue for some lawmakers to hold Trump accountable for the siege. Republicans who support an independent inquiry include Senator Lindsey Graham, Republican from South Carolina. I was surprised about that. Lindsey Graham and Mitch McConnell have become like, have multiple personality disorder. And I don't, I really shouldn't say that because there are people who really suffer from that. Let me phrase it a different way. Those two individuals seem to be so blatantly hypocritical that it's almost like they have a dual personality. Is that a better way to put it? Because Senator Lindsey Graham acquitted the president, talks with the president, assures the president, says the president's going to help the party in 2022. Lindsey Graham seems to be all about Trump being in charge of still the Republican Party. Mitch McConnell, not so much, but Mitch McConnell had the opportunity, we all know, to have a quick trial before Trump left office. Then he and his other Republicans, couldn't say, hey, this is unconstitutional. He's no longer in office. He is now a private citizen. But the bottom line is what Lindsey Graham and Mitch McConnell are doing, and Mitch McConnell more so, is they are straddling the fence of the GOP between the Marjorie Taylor Greene QAnon folks in the Republican Party, and there are plenty of them. Look at the polls just recently that came out this week, and in the past few days, and then the moderate centrist GOP members, the Reagan GOP, Reagan Republicans, the ones that say, hey, some of them, the president was guilty of inciting an insurrection on January 6th. Anyway, this is what our speaker is saying, quote, to protect our security, our next step will be to establish an outside independent 9/11 type commission to investigate and report on the facts and causes relating to the domestic terror attack upon the United States Capitol complex. That was said in her letter. She further went on to say, quote, and relating to the interference with the peaceful transfer of power, including facts and causes relating to the preparedness and response of the United States Capitol Police and other federal, state, and local law enforcement in the National Capital Region. Now, for the record, Pelosi last month appointed Lieutenant General Russell Honore to conduct a security infrastructure review of the Capitol following the riots. In other words, this was sort of in play behind the scenes. After consulting with Honore, she wrote yesterday that she would move forward with plans for emergency funding laws to provide for the safety of members and the security of the Capitol. We forget this is not just about our elected officials. This is about people who work there. This is about security personnel, Capitol Police. This is about people who cook in the building. This is about staff members who work in the building, interns who work in the building, often without pay, people who clean the floors, people who are maintenance people, mechanics, plumbers, electricians. All of these individuals' lives were at risk. And by the way, a number of them contracted COVID after January 6th as well. To make a note here, Congressman Jim Jordan, Republican from Ohio, James Comer, a Republican from Kentucky, Devin Nunes, Republican from California, and Rodney Davis, Republican from Illinois, actually wrote to her yesterday to express concerns about the independence of Honore and his final recommendations and whether the speaker would have an influence on the outcome. Now, this is what you want to watch. Legislation would probably be needed to establish a commission like the one created following the attacks on September 11th back in 2001. And then President George W. Bush signed a law giving the panel investigation powers, noted by the New York Times. We could see a similar situation with our current president, Joe Biden. Let's rip another. Now the lawsuits might come, one of which is from the NAACP that was filed today against former President Trump and far-right extremist groups in connection with the January 6th Capitol riots that killed 5 people and injured dozens of officers. We also want to mention 2 officers took their lives, so technically the January 6th riots resulted in the death of 7 people, even though 2 took their lives. The federal lawsuit filed on behalf of House Homeland Security Chairman Benny Thompson, Democrat of Mississippi, shows that Trump continues to face legal problems stemming from the riot, even after his acquittal in the Senate impeachment trial over the weekend. The lawsuit filed in the U.S. District Court in D.C. by the NAACP and the civil rights law firm Cohen, Milstein, Sellers, and Toll accuses the former president, his attorney, Rudy Giuliani, the Proud Boys, and the Oath Keepers of conspiring to incite a riot at the Capitol with the goal of preventing Congress from certifying the 2020 presidential election. It alleges that Trump, Giuliani, and the far-right groups directly violated the 1871 Ku Klux Klan Act by trying to prevent Congress from carrying out its official duties. I'm Leslie Marshall. That's what's ripped from the headlines. Second, we will talk more about ripped from the headlines, and then with our guest right after this. Don't go away.
If you're worried your friend may be struggling, remember, you don't have to be there to be there.
You could say, how are you, or get a fake tattoo. You could ask with an app if it works for you. You could write them a text or knit them a sweater. If you can't be together, you could write them a letter. Whatever gets you talking. Whatever gets you talking. You could chat on the game, kick off your flip-flops. You could ask on your couch while you binge watch. However you do it, you gotta ask a friend. And if they don't share, you can ask again. Whatever gets you talking. Whatever gets you talking.
Reach out to a friend about their mental health. Learn how you can help at seizetheawkward.org. Brought to you by the Ad Council, American Foundation for Suicide Prevention, and the JED Foundation.
I was in the middle of the Atlantic Ocean when it happened. There was a sudden jolt and our submarine crashed on the seafloor. We were in total darkness.
That's Dr. Dejana Figueroa, a marine biologist and STEM teacher, talking about a deep sea dive she'll never forget.
It's funny, when I was a kid, I was afraid of the ocean, and there I was, 2 miles below the surface. But as a scientist, you prepare for that. Using our training and a little creativity, we fixed the sub and finished our experiments. The dive was just too important. Every dive gives us glimpses at things few people ever get to see. Glowing creatures, fiery undersea volcanoes. When we got back to the surface, I kissed the ground and called my mom, of course. But you know what? I wouldn't trade that dive for anything.
Dr. Figueroa uses her passion for STEM to discover new things and make the world a better place. She can STEM, so can you. Check out She Can STEM for more stories and inspiration. A message from the Ad Council.
I'm Rick Smith, and this is Labor History in 2. On this day in labor history, the year was 2011. That was the day Madison public school teachers held a sick-out in opposition to Governor Scott Walker's anti-labor assaults. Walker had introduced Assembly Bill 11, later known as Act 10. This union-busting bill proposed the elimination of collective bargaining rights for public sector workers regarding health and pension benefits, limited wage increases, eliminated dues collection, and mandated annual union recertification. Immediately, tens of thousands of protesters descended on the state capitol, chanting, "Kill the bill," and took part in hearings to voice their opposition. Area schools remained closed for days as protests continued to grow throughout the spring. While parts of Act 10 have been ruled unconstitutional in the years since, the legislation has nonetheless wreaked havoc. A series in Milwaukee's Journal Sentinel titled Act 10 at 5 examined how public school teachers have fared since the Madison uprising. They found that 75% of school districts are losing teachers, retirements have surged, less are entering the profession, and most job hop to the highest salary offers. The teachers' unions report major losses. MTEA notes that membership is down 30%. WEAC reports that membership and dues collection were cut in half. Seniority rights have evaporated and layoffs are increasingly tied to performance. Annual salary growth has slowed, stopped, or reversed. Teacher morale is low in many districts. Teachers often complain of additional unpaid duties, larger class sizes, and more performance reviews. There are new restrictions on attire as well as speech and political activities. If there is any good news, it is that unions survive annual recertification and remaining members are more active and more engaged in union work.
If you missed Leslie on TV this week, catch up at lesliemarshallshow.com.
We are back doing my online stuff during the break there. I'm Leslie Marshall. Welcome or welcome back. We're going to continue now with what is ripped from the headline. Looking to see, oh boy, I got a lot, right, to cover. I just wanted to share with you because I had just talked about the lawsuit, the lawsuit regarding the 1871 Ku Klux Klan Act. That allowed President Ulysses Grant to declare martial law and impose heavy penalties against terrorist organizations and use military force to suppress the KKK after the Civil War. But let me tell you about what the Biden administration announced today. Today, they announced it's extending the moratorium on home foreclosures and the enrollment window for mortgage forbearance, and that will be through the summer, June. Now, remember, allegedly, we're going to be all vaccinated by April or May. And you need to get your vaccine, by the way. You need to get your vaccine. My husband's had his, and he is a healthcare worker. And I will wait in line for mine, and hopefully my children. I don't know if my children get the adult one because my daughter's turning 13, my son is turning 14. Yikes, 2 teens in the house, right? But they don't have a vaccine for children as of yet. They're working on that as well. But why does this matter? Well, obviously, many Americans are struggling to make home payments since the COVID-19 pandemic commenced. Both programs were set to expire in March. The actions are an extension of a program the Trump administration did start back in 2020. And the Department of Housing and Urban Development, HUD, the VA, Veterans Affairs and Agriculture, will carry out the executive action according to the White House. New relief will provide up to 6 months of additional mortgage payment forbearance in 3-month increments for borrowers who entered the program on or before June 30th, 2020. The White House wrote in a news release today, quote, "Now homeowners will receive urgently needed relief as we face this unprecedented national emergency. Today's actions build on steps the president took on day one to extend foreclosure moratoriums for federally guaranteed mortgages." And I think that's the right move. Let's rip another. Another right move President Joe Biden did, in my opinion, was reopening the federal health insurance marketplace. And that was yesterday. That is for another 3 months, 90 days, citing the importance of access to health care when more than 1 out of 12 Americans has now been infected with the coronavirus. And why does it matter? Well, nearly 15 million Americans are still uninsured, and the COVID-19 coronavirus pandemic rages on. By the numbers per AXIOS Caitlin Owens, of the 15 million people eligible for coverage under the Affordable Care Act, 4 million are eligible for the free high deductible plan. 4.9 million would qualify for a subsidized plan. 6 million wouldn't qualify for any subsidy. But, you just look at the numbers, that's, almost a third that can benefit from this plan in one way or another. And I have to say, politics aside, even though I didn't like Trump and I didn't like his politics, you don't need a degree from Harvard University in rocket science to know you don't put up barriers to individuals trying to obtain health insurance when you're in the middle of a health pandemic, a health crisis. Let's rip another. And the Biden administration and Democrats on the Hill are expected later this week to release an immigration reform bill. That's according to multiple sources familiar with the plan that was reported to NBC News. The legislative text of the U.S. Citizenship Act of 2021 will reflect the immigration priorities that President Joe Biden unveiled on his first day in office. So the proposal includes an earned pathway to citizenship for the approximately 11 million undocumented immigrants in our nation, expands the refugee settlement program, and deploys more technology to the southern border. There are additional protections that are being considered in that legislation, such as asylum processing in home countries for minors, expanding benefits for dreamers, and ending the public charge rule. Now, while there have been previous attempts at massive immigration reform, they have failed, and that's whether it was a Republican or a Democratic administration. The Biden White House has signaled support for breaking the legislation into pieces so we could get pieces of it done at a time. And as a potential secondary path, lawmakers would work to pass bills legalizing farm workers and dreamers right away, and then they would move toward a more expansive overhaul. The main objective, according to officials and the advocates, they say is progress, which we're at a standstill, right? I mean, Marilena Hincapié, executive director of the National Immigration Law Center, said, quote, if certain parts of the bill become building blocks, that's fine. Some parts of Biden's immigration reform already do have vehicles to move separately and faster through both the House and the Senate. Senator Robert Menendez, the New Jersey Democrat, is leading the push, the legislative push in the Senate. He said, quote, this plan is not only about fixing our broken immigration system. And by the way, there's a support from the majority of individuals in this country, overwhelming majority, to get citizenship for dreamers first and foremost, right? I mean, so that's something we can agree on. So if we can't get the whole pie, let's cut it up into pieces and pass it a little bit at a time. Better than nothing at all. We need to move forward. We need to do something. I can't imagine the limbo these individuals face every time they go to sleep and every time they wake up in the morning, day after day. So Senator Menendez said this plan is not only about, and I quote, this plan is not only about fixing our broken immigration system, but building a better one that reunites families, brings the undocumented community out of the shadows and on a path to citizenship, stands up for human rights, addresses root causes of migration, and includes a smart border security strategy. And Representative Linda T. Sanchez, the Democrat from California who's spearheading this legislative effort in the House, she said many people are still, relying on these reforms to come about. She said, quote, from our dreamers to the service workers and farmers pulling us through this pandemic, there are too many relying on this reform for us to fail. I look forward to working with President Biden as well as my House colleagues to finally make our immigration system more functional, fair, and humane. President Biden already signed a raft of executive actions reforming targeting immigration and rolling back Trump's efforts on immigration and to separate families. I just want to say the Latino community has been disproportionately affected by COVID, not just the virus, but as far as financial, not just physical. They are essential workers. If you're having a bowl of fruit or a salad, you can bet that there are undocumented workers somewhere in that line between when the fruit was harvested and picked till it gets to your bowl, your plate, into your mouth, and goes into your belly. And these individuals pay taxes, by the way, yet they don't get any benefit from the taxation that they pay, right? They're afraid to go to hospitals. They can't vote. They're demonized by those on the right in our country. And it's about time that we stop ignoring people that have been here longer than some of us who were born here. Let's rip another. Now, the pandemic has not been kind to Fresno, California. That's the poorest major city in California. I think, by the way, that is Kevin McCarthy's district, if I'm not mistaken. The unemployment rate there spiked above 10% and has stubbornly remained there. Violent crime has surged. Homelessness, tax revenue has plummeted as businesses have shuttered. Lines at food banks are filled with first-timers. But as bad as it's been, things could get worse. Hundreds of jobs that were have been frozen. City is now being forced to consider laying off 250 people, including police and firefighters, to close a $31 million budget shortfall. That, Jerry Dyer, mayor of the 500,000-strong city in the Central Valley, is going to be devastating. Yes, for all of those people that say it's blue Democrat-governed areas that are the problem. Right. I'm Leslie Marshall. That's what's ripped from the headlines. Coming up, our great guest, Stick around. We'll be back right after this.
If you're worried your friend may be struggling, remember, you don't have to be there to be there.
You could say, how are you, or get a fake tattoo. You can ask with an app if it works for you. You could write them a text or knit them a sweater. If you can't be together, you could write them a letter. Whatever gets you talking. Whatever gets you talking. You could chat on the game, kick off your flip-flops. You can ask on your couch while you binge watch. However you do it, you gotta ask a friend. And if they don't share, you can ask again. Whatever gets you talking. Whatever gets you talking.
Reach out to a friend about their mental health. Learn how you can help at seizetheawkward.org. Brought to you by the Ad Council, American Foundation for Suicide Prevention, and the JED Foundation.
I was in the middle of the Atlantic Ocean when it happened. There was a sudden jolt and our submarine crashed on the seafloor. We were in total darkness.
That's Dr. Dejana Figueroa, a marine biologist and STEM teacher, talking about a deep sea dive she'll never forget.
It's funny, when I was a kid, I was afraid of the ocean. And there I was, 2 miles below the surface. But as a scientist, you prepare for that. Using our training and a little creativity, we fixed the sub and finished our experiments. The dive was just too important. Every dive gives us glimpses at things few people ever get to see. Glowing creatures, fiery undersea volcanoes. When we got back to the surface, I kissed the ground and called my mom, of course. But you know what? I wouldn't trade that dive for anything.
Dr. Figueroa uses her passion for STEM to discover new things and make the world a better place. She can STEM, so can you. Check out She Can STEM for more stories and inspiration. A message from the Ad Council.
I'm Rick Smith, and this is Labor History in 2. On this day in labor history, the year was 2011. That was the day Madison public school teachers held a sick-out in opposition to Governor Scott Walker's anti-labor assaults. Walker had introduced Assembly Bill 11, later known as Act 10. This union-busting bill proposed the elimination of collective bargaining rights for public sector workers regarding health and pension benefits, limited wage increases, eliminated dues collection, and mandated annual union recertification. Immediately, tens of thousands of protesters descended on the state capitol, chanting, "Kill the bill," and took part in hearings to voice their opposition. Area schools remained closed for days as protests continued to grow throughout the spring. While parts of Act 10 have been ruled unconstitutional in the years since, the legislation has nonetheless wreaked havoc. A series in Milwaukee's Journal Sentinel titled Act 10 at 5 examined how public school teachers have fared since the Madison uprising. They found that 75% of school districts are losing teachers, retirements have surged, less are entering the profession, and most job hop to the highest salary offers. The teachers' unions report major losses. MTEA notes that membership is down 30%. WEAC reports that membership and dues collection were cut in half. Seniority rights have evaporated and layoffs are increasingly tied to performance. Annual salary growth has slowed, stopped, or reversed. Teacher morale is low in many districts. Teachers often complain of additional unpaid duties, larger class sizes, and more performance reviews. There are new restrictions on attire as well as speech and political activities. If there is any good news, it is that unions survive annual recertification and remaining members are more active and more engaged in union work.
Follow Leslie on Twitter. Just go to www.twitter.com/Leslie Marshall, and we'll be sure to share your tweets.
Hey there, I'm Leslie Marshall. Welcome or welcome back. We welcome back Dr. Bob Bollinger. He is the Raj and Kamla Gupta Professor of Infectious Diseases at the Johns Hopkins University School of Medicine, and he holds joint appointments in international health at the Johns Hopkins Bloomberg School of Public Health and in community public health at the Johns Hopkins School of Nursing. He's also the founding director of the Center for Clinical Global Health Education, the CCGHE. The center is doing a lot of COVID-19 related work, not only in this country, but beyond our borders. headquarters. Their website, do check it out during the break, is main.ccghe.net. That's Maine, MAIN. And then on Facebook, go to facebook.com/CCGHE. Dr. Bollinger, more than a pleasure to have you back on the show. I know you're busy, so thank you for taking the time to be with us today. I am honored and appreciate your expertise. Thank you.
Nice to see you again, Leslie. Thank you.
The CDC has now released school guidelines, and I mean, there's just so much with regard to opening the classrooms. You're obviously not a teacher. You are a teacher in a different respect, but you're not a public school teacher. You're not a part of a teachers union, and you're certainly not politically affiliated with regard to this. You talk to us all the time just about the health aspect, the medical aspect. So first and foremost, the guidelines that the CDC has released from a medical standpoint, how do they rate? Do you like them? Do you feel they're not sufficient? Do you feel there's some contradictory information out there?
Well, I think there's certainly a big improvement over the recommendations we've had before, which, from the CDC in the past months have been pretty vague. These are much more specific, a little clearer, and I think that's really helpful. And of course, they're recommendations and guidelines. They're not mandates. They have to be, reviewed and interpreted and implemented by, local jurisdictions. But it's a lot clearer, I think, what they're suggesting, what they're recommending now than what has been in the past. So that's a big improvement.
Yeah, and I'm glad that you put that. It's not, CDC isn't holding a gun to anyone's head. They're saying, look, from our medical standpoint, here's what we have. One of the things I like that's been criticized with these guidelines and these recommendations, doctor, is the flexibility within those tiers. For example, obviously, geography plays a part during winter. I live in Southern California where I can open the window right now and I'm not going to freeze to death. Same in Florida. That's not the case in the majority of this country. And I say that because obviously some schools would really require ventilation systems more than others. How necessary are those from a medical perspective? Because we know restaurants, shopping centers, supermarkets may not have those types of ventilation systems either, and we are there and perhaps exposing our children to that as well.
Well, I think one of the things that's that this discussion has highlighted is that we really need to be paying attention to ventilation. We've talked a lot about hand hygiene, about cleaning surfaces, particularly in schools and other workplaces, that's always important. But listen, we wouldn't have to clean the surfaces if this virus wasn't getting into the air and landing on surfaces, right? So this is an airborne virus that, people breathe it out, cough it out, and that's why it ends up on surfaces. So the ventilation issues are really important. And I think they're important for schools, important for restaurants, important for lots of indoor settings. I think the other issue that you talked about is that the flexibility is also built into these guidelines for different communities based on the amount of virus they're seeing in those different communities. So I think that's a good thing. But I think they're giving guidance and clarity to some of the issues that we've needed for some time.
Yes, certainly, because ventilation is more of an issue in a bigger city with higher COVID infection rates where you have a larger classroom and it is physically impossible to have those children spaced 6 feet apart. That might be, possible in smaller public school communities in the country. Certainly, it might be possible in private schools where they may have smaller classrooms. But some of these big cities where you have 30, 35, even 40 children in a classroom, they just don't have the physical space to separate them 6 feet apart. So addressing the ventilation system would be essential. But obviously, there are individuals in the school system that say, but look at the expense. We're not sure we can afford to do that.
Well, it is a challenge, of course, for lots of places, but they're also emphasizing the other things that can be done. The masking is also being emphasized, which is critically important. And they're talking about cohorting and other strategies that can help take, some of that risk down. But you're right, every school system is going to have to adjust and implement the guidelines as best they can based on their resources and the structure they have in their own classroom. So I think, giving options and clarity to the tools that are available to reduce the risk is important. The other thing that the guidelines highlight, and I think is also important, is we need to get the kids back to school, number one. And number two, if you can implement these guidelines, if you can effectively put into place masking and distancing and all the other strategies, you can actually reduce the risk considerably that you're going to have spreading of the virus in the classroom. I mean, that the data really supports that. So if you can do it, you can more confidently open the classrooms in a more safe environment.
30 minutes after my radio show ends today, my children are going to school for 2 hours to work on homework with their peers and their teachers. Woo-hoo, mommy's going to have a cocktail. And because there's been mental stress and strain on the kids, but also on the parents, those who work from home, and even more so for people that haven't been able to go to work because they can't work from home, and haven't been able to have that sole income coming in or that secondary, income coming in. So I think there's light at the end of the tunnel. There are a lot of people that, especially teachers, even some parents, that are concerned about teachers don't have to be vaccinated. Can you talk to us about this? Because I think a lot of people feel that if teachers get vaccinated, it's easier and better, to open the schools. But, to your point, if you're masking, if you're hand washing, you're social distancing, you have the proper ventilation system, is the vaccine just the cherry on top of that sundae?
Well, I mean, I think the issue around that subject is probably has to do with the following. The biggest risk that teachers and other adults who work in schools have for contracting this virus is outside of the school. It's in the community. And so whether they're vaccinated or not, they need to be wearing masks, and whether they're teachers or not, whether they're staff members or not, they need to be wearing masks with or without the vaccine. And so I think, I would love to see all the teachers get vaccinated. In fact, not just teachers, of course, as we said, it's all of the staff members, particularly those at high risk, should they get infected. But their biggest risk of infection is outside of the school, statistically. When they're going to the restaurants, when they're, mingling with their friends and family. That's where most of the infections that occur in adults are occurring, not in the school itself. So the issue is whether to reduce the risk that those teachers, staff members, and students are going to bring the virus into school. Now, vaccination isn't going to really, it's going to be helpful in any of those situations. So it's not unique to the schools, right? So I'm not sure we necessarily need to focus on the need for vaccination as a high priority or a necessary priority before we open up schools, particularly when the rates are going down. But we have to provide vaccination to everybody, including teachers. And teachers are, first responders, not just teachers, but other people that work in schools or around other people. I think we should prioritize them and quickly get them vaccinated. It'll protect.
Speaking of the vaccine that is out now, doctor, I apologize for the interruption. I thought you were done. The vaccine that is out now, that is for adults, but medically, what is considered an adult? Is that 21? Is that 18? Or is that even 12? I say because I've seen studies where it says 12 and up.
Well, some of the studies that I've seen have enrolled people over the age of 16 or 18. We don't have data yet on the vaccine safety and efficacy in younger kids and adolescents, and those studies are going on right now. But it's going to take some months before we, can convince ourselves that they're safe and efficacious in those kids. And so it's going to be a while before we can vaccinate the kids.
Are the variants that we are hearing about of COVID, the mutations of COVID, do they put children at more risk in your research or knowledge of this thus far? The reason I say that is, you see bits and pieces on the news where the UK or South African, Brazilian variant seems to, in some places, even outside the United States, led to more children being hospitalized.
Well, I'm not sure it's related to hospitalization, but certainly more kids are getting infected. All of us are getting more likely to get infected, as well as kids. And so when you have more kids getting infected because it's more infectious, then of course you're going to unfortunately have more kids in the hospital. So it's really, these variants are a bit of a wild card. We'll have to see what impact that has, particularly in the United States, as we open up the schools. But we could certainly see these variants more easily spread in the classroom as they are more easily spread in the community.
Yeah, we're going to take a quick break. When we come back, we'll talk more about schools with our guest, with the good doctor, and I hope you'll stick around. In the meantime, check out the Center for Clinical Global Health Education, the CCGHE. That's where he is founding director. They do a lot of COVID-related work in the U.S. and beyond. Check out their website, main.ccghe.net, and on Facebook, facebook.com/CCGHE. We'll be back with Dr. Bob Bollinger from Johns Hopkins University right after this.
America, your children have an amazing superpower. They can help save lives by not having play dates. That's right. By replacing get-togethers with virtual play dates and video chats, they can help slow the evil spread of germs. And if your superheroes do go outside, make sure they continue their superhero wing by staying 6 feet away from others to protect everyone in America land. Find out more at coronavirus.gov. A message from the CDC and the Ad Council. America, your children have an amazing superpower. That's right. They can help save lives by simply washing their hands. Just 20 seconds of thorough hand washing after they've coughed or sneezed or been outside can help fight against the dastardly spread of germs. Armed with only soap and water and hands, your superhero can protect you, your family, and everyone out there in America land. Amazing! Find out more at coronavirus.gov. A message from the CDC and the Ad Council.
He was the heart of your family, and he taught you our history. He helped you fix your first flat. He was the best backyard DJ around, and every time he'd tell a story, he'd own the room. But now more than ever, he may feel alone. Today, older adults and their loved ones are struggling to connect, in a time when connection has never been more important. But there is something we can do. Embrace our older loved ones through StoryCorps Connect. With StoryCorps Connect, you can honor seniors remotely with an interview about their life. Every interview will be archived at the Library of Congress, becoming part of American history, so that years from now, future generations can listen in.
All right, Grandpa, what's one piece of advice you have for me?
Just 3 words, sweetheart. Live with courage.
The man that had the best stories still has plenty of stories to tell. So connect virtually and share the conversation of a lifetime at StoryCorpsConnect.org/AARP. Connect, honor, share. StoryCorps Connect. A message from AARP, StoryCorps, and the Ad Council.
Welcome to Code WAC, your podcast on America's broken healthcare system and how Medicare for All could help. I'm your host, Brenda Gazar. How did Hugo Morales, co-founder and executive director of Radio Bilingue, become such an impassioned champion for farm workers' rights in California's Central Valley and beyond? What life experiences shaped him into the influencer that he is today? We recently had the honor of asking him ourselves. So what was life like for you as a boy in the U.S.?
We settled in a farm labor camp with my father. And so we grew up with no health insurance, no minimum wage, no sanitation regulations or enforcement, no inspection of the sanitary facilities there. At the same time, during the summer was prune season. There was a 100-acre prune farm. That's when the migrants would come and help pick the crops. And got to see, literally the hundreds of cars of migrants come through and, with no job, literally with cars full of children. And the children, of course, would work. Got to see how parents are deprived of having a decent salary, so they can afford to keep health insurance or properly take care of their children or properly provide nutritious food, and lack of information about nutrition and the rights and so on. So I ended up actually at a tuberculosis hospital from that experience. Tuberculosis follows poverty and all that. So I ended up locked up for a year in isolation when I was 12 years old. So I have a history in terms of access to healthcare. And of course, I had a contagious disease. I was pulled out of school when I was a 7th grader out of Healdsburg Junior High and put in isolation.
Get the full Code WAC story on ProgressiveVoices.com and on the PV app. Catch all our episodes by subscribing to Code WAC wherever you find your podcasts. This podcast is powered by Heal California, a nonprofit that uplifts the voices of those fighting for healthcare reform around the country. Until next time, stay healthy.
Follow Leslie on Twitter. Just go to www.twitter.com/Leslie Marshall, and we'll be sure to share your tweets.
Well, we're live when you can hear my dog barking in the background. Apologies for those of you that hear it. If you feel it's a distraction, apologies more so to my guest, Dr. Bob Bollinger. He is the Raj and Kamla Gupta Professor of Infectious Diseases at the Johns Hopkins University School of Medicine. He holds joint appointments in international health at the Johns Hopkins Bloomberg School of Public Health and in community public health at the JH School of Nursing. Probably, one of the people in the world that's definitely busier than me and definitely does something a lot more important than I do. Doctor, thank you for holding and staying with us for the second half of the interview. You already shared as a physician, what you think of the guidelines. Are the doctors and public health experts that you would come into contact with, in agreement with you? Would you say that these are more specific guidelines that had been set forth prior to the CDC's guidelines in the last administration versus now?
Yeah, I would say that for the most part, people agree that this is a step in the right direction.
Awesome. I wanted to ask this. I have a 12 and 13-year-old, and I'm asking personally, but I'm asking, about age, okay? And, I'm assuming you have children. If not, you may be smarter than I right now. But when you look at some of these guidelines, and they talk about middle school versus high school, for example, I'm getting to that part of the document. On the CDC guidelines, they say that middle and high schools can safely operate in person at all but the highest level of transmission, which is defined in two ways: when 10% or more of the coronavirus tests in a community come back positive over a 7-day period, or when there are 100 or more virus cases per 100,000 people in the community over 7 days. The reason I ask is right now, my kid's school, which is right down the street, and I just passed a bunch of kids, K through 2, kindergarten through second grade, is operating at many schools here in Southern California, and I live in Los Angeles County. Some people I know in my parental circles question, how come we can send the younger kids back before the older kids? Because younger kids, I think, pick their nose more, touch their face more, touch each other and each other's faces more, and have a harder time keeping a mask on than a middle school or a high school student. So could you speak to that for us, why the older children are being kept back from school longer than the younger kids?
Well, I mean, you'd have to ask Rochelle Walensky, because I'm sure she's also has kids as well, so she probably could answer this question herself. We having raised 3 teenagers who are no longer teenagers and middle schoolers. I'm not sure I would agree entirely with your premise that the older kids are better behaved than the younger kids necessarily.
You know my children then.
Mike, then you must have known mine. I think it's true for all kids. Look, I think the one of the challenges is with the younger kids, they've been able to keep the kids in a single classroom, generally cohorting easier. And the kids are actually, based on my, conversations with teachers and parents, particularly even in the really young kids, they're pretty good at putting their masks on, and they're easier to kind of keep an eye on, right? They're usually in a smaller classroom or in a group, and they're not mingling from class to class. They're not milling around the whole school, moving from one bubble, if you will, to another bubble. They're not running out behind the school to congregate with each other as easily as the younger kids. So the older kids are at greater risk for, if you will, breaking the bubbles, right? Right. And I think that's the issue why at a higher transmission rate, you have to be more concerned about the older kids.
Do you think these guidelines will encourage more school districts to bring students back into the classrooms? I mean, certainly there are fights between different unions. Randy Weingarten, who's a friend of this program, is the president of the AFT, the American Federation of Teachers, but there are other unions, as we saw in Chicago, for example, where they're saying, look, we're not comfortable going back. We want to be vaccinated. And then some school districts do have, or some states do have teachers at top of the list with healthcare workers and first responders to get vaccinated. Even though this is, the CDC saying, here are the guidelines, it doesn't encourage more districts to bring students back into the classroom. It doesn't make it easier in a sense.
Well, I think it provides, first of all, I think the teachers are just as anxious to get the kids back in school as the rest of us, right? Many of them are parents as well. They understand the value of why it's important to get them back. But they want to do it safely, not only for themselves and for the staff, but for the kids, right? So I think it's all about providing as safe a possible opportunity and guidance to get back in the classroom. And these guidelines help do that. So I'm hoping that these guidelines are going to help move us forward to a place where the teachers and the parents and the students all feel like it's safer to open up and get the kids back at school. But I do understand the concerns, particularly, teachers and other staff who were at high risk for serious disease. But again, the risk of acquiring infection in the school depends a lot more on what's happening outside the school than it does within the school. As long as you have the guidelines in place and follow those CDC guidelines, you've really have an opportunity to greatly mitigate the risk. People aren't following these CDC school guidelines out in the community. If we did that, we wouldn't have this problem, right?
No, absolutely. And to that point, and you had touched upon one of these two earlier, I think there's this idea that once you're vaccinated, you don't have to wear masks. There's also this idea, we even have a legislator, Senator Rand Paul, who got COVID and survived and doesn't wear a mask because he thinks he's immune. The evidence, the jury is still out on that. Correct me if I'm wrong, doctor.
There's two issues. Number one, just because you're immune doesn't mean, or vaccinated, doesn't mean you can't get infected and transmit the virus to other people unknowingly, just like asymptomatic infections do all the time around the country. So it's irresponsible, in my view, particularly somebody who's been infected, to not wear a mask to protect others from infection. We also have the issue now with some of the new variants that there's some evidence you can get reinfected with the new variants. And so we're not entirely sure yet how, the data looks pretty good for the most common variants, but we're just beginning to learn about our own variants here in the United States. We'll have to see. So there is a potential risk for reinfection as well. But
Dr. Fauci, Dr. Anthony,
others.
Dr. Anthony Fauci said that we should all be vaccinated, or there'll be enough vaccines for us to all be vaccinated. I think he had said, April or May. Biden administration also says by April or May. How realistic is that, in your opinion?
Well, I'm a little biased. I have to show you. I have my little shrine here, my Tony Fauci votive candle. This is my.
I love it. Your Italian Roman Catholic candle for the Italian Roman Catholic.
Saint Anthony Fauci. So I have a lot of confidence in Tony's recommendations. He's making adjustments based on the data that's available. So they're tracking how much vaccine these manufacturers are able to get out as quickly as possible. And so his estimates on when, we're going to have wide, availability of vaccines is based on that, which is changing from week to week, depending on the manufacturing issues that each of these companies are dealing with. We also have another vaccine from Johnson & Johnson that's in the pipeline. And, we're not quite sure yet when it's going to get approved, for example, and when it can actually be released. And all of that is sort of shifting the sand a little bit on the calendar of when we're going to have full access.
Some people, obviously, as you know, you see the numbers, are afraid to get the vaccine. And then some people see things like congressional members that were vaccinated, or at least had the first vaccine, getting infected after January 6th, as an example, with the riots that took place on Capitol Hill. Is that because, most likely, in your medical professional opinion, that there is a time frame, I've heard, between 10 and 12 days that the first vaccine builds up into your system or prepares your immune system before the second round?
Well, that's certainly part of it. Yeah. I mean, we know that it also takes two injections really to achieve full immunity for at least the Moderna and the Pfizer vaccines. And most of the data suggests you got to be about 2 to 3 weeks after your second vaccine to be fully protected. But don't forget, none of those people ended up in the hospital. None of those people that got infected ended up in the hospital. And what people have to keep in mind is that, we've had 470,000 plus Americans die of this infection who were not vaccinated. And the vaccines that we have now are incredibly helpful in protecting people from dying from this infection. So think about what would have happened to those 470,000 plus people if we'd had the vaccine a year ago or 6 months ago and they were able to be vaccinated. Many, many of those lives would have been saved.
You've probably seen and heard the stats regarding healthcare workers who were hesitant to being vaccinated. I'm sure you may even know some of those people. What do you say to that?
Yeah, I think we've got vaccine hesitancy in lots of parts of our society. I'm not sure what to say to the healthcare workers who understand the science. I think I'm not sure what the reasons are for vaccine hesitancy. I think a bigger challenge is the fact that we, as a society, have lost the trust, if you will, of big parts of our community who are actually suffering the most from this disease. Our Latino community, our African American community, our Native communities at really high risk, and that's a challenge for all of us. We've got to do a better job communicating, educating, and supporting those communities who are at greatest risk to get the vaccine and make sure they have access to it. But for good reasons and many historic reasons, they don't trust what they're hearing. And we need to work on that incredibly hard. I think that's the biggest challenge we have, vaccination.
Right, the disproportionately affected and disproportionately non-trusted. And who can blame them, right? Doctor, thank you for being with us. Light Dr. Fauci's candle for me so we can all get vaccinated. Thank you so much. Dr. Bob Bollinger, founding director.
Take care.
Health Education, CCGHE. Check them out, bean.ccghe.net, on Facebook, facebook.com/CCGHE.